Broadcasting from beautiful Leesburg, Virginia. Welcome to the Music Educator podcast, bringing you the latest tips, tricks, and practical advice you can use tomorrow. Here's your host and fellow music educator, Bill Stevens.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of the Music Educator podcast. My name is Bill Stevens. I'm so excited you're here. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're returning, thank you so much for joining us again. In today's episode, we're going to talk about common sound production problems and solutions for the flute and piccolo. Let's get started. The flute and respectively the piccolo have a storied evolution that has taken place from since before 900 BC in China. The flute, created by Theobald Boehm, serves as the basis for the modern instrument. Like many other instruments, the flute is not a perfectly crafted invention and has certain innate problems that musicians must overcome in order to successfully master it. In today's episode, we are going to identify some of the flute and piccolo's common innate problems. Common problems. Number 1. The aperture is too large or too high. The aperture, or rather the opening in the lips, is often too large or too high. As a result of this, the flute tends to sound airy and has an unfocused tone. As a reminder, the flute aperture is not supposed to be a perfectly round hole, but rather a slit in the center of the lips. Note that the slit between the lips should be no longer than the tone hole on the flute. Number 2. The musician has a poor holding position. Multiple examples of this include the right arm is resting on the back of the chair. This results in the flute being rolled too far inward and creates a flat and stifled sound. Correct this by having the right arm out, not resting on the body or furniture. The musician is resting their right index finger on the flute rod to stabilize the instrument. Focus on using the 3 points of balance for the flute. And finally, the right pinky is sometimes used as a point of balance. Again, remember that there are only 3 points of balance for the flute. Number 3. The foot joint and lower joint rods are lined up. This is a mistake for many beginning students. Continue to remind them to make sure their foot joint rod is in the center of the bottom key of the body of the flute. Number 4. Too much of the lower lip is covering the blowhole. This is often caused by the musician rolling in too far. As a result, this can cause the sound to go flat and sound small. One cause of this is that the right arm is too low, or it's resting on a chair. Number 5. Too much lip pressure on the flute. There should be minimal lip pressure used. Mind you, some is required. Remember, someone should be able to tap the flute or piccolo off the player's lips rather easily if the correct amount of pressure is being used. Number 6. The use of mid to low range fingering in the highest register of the instrument. Low to mid range fingerings used for the highest notes of the flute will noticeably be out of tune. This is a common mistake for young flautists because the pitch almost sounds correct. Number 7. The flute may be out of alignment. Now, this is an easy fix. My recommendation is to get a reliable instrumental technician to make the proper adjustments. Number 8. The lip is being supported with the tongue. Now, this is a bad habit that many young students start to make in order to create their first sounds. The danger in this is that the musician never develops a characteristic sound as a result of playing in this manner. In addition, it makes articulation difficult and labored. Number 9. Tonguing through the teeth. When a musician tongues on the flute between the teeth, it is hitting the student's lips instead of the roof of the mouth. This sometimes occurs as a result of the Suzuki teaching strategy that recommends spitting rice. Number 10. Playing the low and middle F sharp with the right second finger. Often, students who played clarinet or saxophone who added the flute to their list of secondary instruments will accidentally play F sharp with their right hand second finger rather than the correct and more in tune right hand third finger. Number 11. Playing flat during soft dynamics. This often occurs when young flautists don't understand that they need to keep the airspeed up and blow more across the tone hole to keep the pitch up. Number 12. Playing a flute with a teardrop upper lip. This is often an unavoidable issue for flute players who have a dip in the center of their upper lip. As a result, this distorts the slit airstream. Flautists have found some success by playing with an offset embouchure. Often, those that play with a teardrop lip will often develop their embouchure at a slower rate than those that have a standard center aperture embouchure. Piccolo. In addition to the innate problems associated with the flute, the piccolo also has a short list of issues such as the following. Number 1. Too much face pressure. Often, inexperienced musicians learning to play the piccolo push the instrument into their face to attempt to play in the upper registers. As a result of this excessive pressure, it often makes these notes almost impossible to play. Number 2. The buzzing of lips in the upper register. This occurs as a result of tightening the lips rather than changing the direction of the airstream. Professionals recommend pointing the upper lip. Since the piccolo is more rolled in and played higher on the lip than the flute, there is less playing surface area. Conclusion. To recap, the flute and piccolo have developed and evolved since before 900 BC. Through the efforts of Theobald Boehm and other countless music enthusiasts, the flute has transformed into a chromatic and beautiful performing instrument. Despite the efforts of instrumental developers, the flute and piccolo have certain innate problems that musicians must overcome in order to masterly perform a plethora of music literature. Fortunately, the recommendations identified in this episode will provide you and your flute students solutions that will serve you the rest of your life. That is all the time we have for today. I want to thank you again for joining me for another episode of the Music Educator Podcast. It is always a true pleasure to share this craft with lovers of music and educators like you. If you found value in today's episode, please feel free to leave a review and rate us on the Music Educator Podcast app, Apple Podcasts, or any other podcast aggregator. Also, please consider supporting the show by becoming an official Music Educator Podcast member or advertise with us on our podcast. Information for this can be found in the show notes. Thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you join us next time. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Music Educator Podcast. For the latest tips, tricks, and practical advice you can use tomorrow. You can subscribe to our podcast on every podcast aggregator or download the Music Educator app for free in the Apple or Google Play app stores. Furthermore, visit our blog at www.bandbuzz.org for additional music education resources. We will see you on the next episode of the Music Educator Podcast. And remember, music can change the world.
Hey everybody, this is Bill Stevens with the Music Educator Podcast. See this episode's show notes for a unique promo code from the Music Educator Podcast to get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn. Get your show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify anywhere you want. Get critical stats to help you grow. Find all the tools and support you need to support your very best. You can even do video. Really bring your podcast to life with Libsyn. See show notes for our unique Libsyn promo code and get podcasting.